and that there's a way to hold people accountable that helps all of us come together as a team, as a family, as a relationship to produce the outcome that you're looking for in those relationships, no matter what. I put together, although pretty much directed at the company level, corporate level, these ideas over time. And it's at the heart of what I created called the Accountability with Care system, to which we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. So from my experiences, I've been doing this now for 27 years. If you follow some of these simple yet effective tools, tips, and techniques, I think you're going to find that your abilities to hold yourself and others accountable will help you out. Can you go to the next slide? Just let me give you a quick overview of what we're going to be doing today. So I have this little game that I play called the 3 W's of accountability. It's very simple, and I thought that I would use this tool to explain and go over my presentation with you today. And we'll get more into this in a moment, but briefly, it's what does it look like? So meaning ideally, what does a relationship that you have with yourself and others look like ideally around accountability? Okay, well, now we have that down. Well, what's in the way of making that a reality? And then finally, what's it going to take? What's the action steps? What do we need to do in order to make that happen? So that's the goal of my presentation today. Along the way, I'm going to be asking you some questions, and we'll have a couple breakout sessions, and then we'll start formulating hopefully many of these yourselves, and maybe I could fill in a few blanks of some tools, tips, techniques, and traps that you'll see you could fall into around accountability, and then we'll wrap it up, if you will. So before we get rocking and rolling, so to speak, I like to just share with you personally, and I don't share this story very often, so bear with me. How did this all begin? How did this all take place? How did I get into this accountability thing? How did I develop this niche, et cetera, et cetera? Well, I own my own business prior to doing what I'm doing today for some 14 years. I'm originally from Connecticut. I have about 4 locations, 30 employees, and I was not very good, as I look back today, on holding myself and others accountable. I'm not proud to tell you that when I had these employees in my organization, I talked down to them. I was demeaning. And probably the worst thing was I was considering myself smarter than everybody and refused to hire anybody smarter than me. And it cost me. And, when things aren't going right at work, they spill into your home life as well. I'm sure many of you have experienced that. And one thing led to another in this business. And to make a long story short, it led to a divorce in my relationship because what was going on at work. I wound up losing, I'm not proud of this, 2 of those 4 locations. I sold the other 2, but I didn't exactly make a lot of money. But the worst thing was, and maybe the worst thing that ever happened in my life as a result of this was, in the midst of this divorce, my former wife moved my then 5-year-old daughter from Connecticut to Maryland. And for the next 2.5 years, I commuted back and forth to see her before I was able to relocate. That hurt. I'm sure many, if not most of you, have kids, and to lose your child like that was just, is extremely tough. So I guess you could say I went on a little bit of a crusade that I didn't want others to go through what I went through. And over time, I started creating this thing about accountability, not sure where the heck it came from. And at first, I put together this outline and did a few talks on it. It turned into a system, which turned into a book. And voila, here I am today. And by the way, my now 35-year-old daughter who is getting married in May. I think we have the closest relationship that we've ever had, but I just wanted to give you that background on how this all came about. Thanks for listening. You can go to the next slide if you would, Bruce. Thank you. So I talked about these 3 W's, and the first one is, what does it look like? Let me tell you a little bit more about what I mean by that. So you could use this little 3-part game of what's it look like, what's in a way, what's it going to take, and pretty much any endeavor in your life. But here we're trying to, what I would refer to as creating the ideal relationship with other people regarding accountability. That's what we're talking about. What does that look like? So, for example, when I played this game with a couple, a married couple, that said their desired outcome was to go on an ideal vacation. And we got that down to, as we call everything, including the white picket fence, if you will, where they're going, how long they want to stay. It was Hawaii for 2 weeks at this particular hotel, so on and so forth, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm looking for from all of you before we even begin is, what does accountability look like and mean to you? What's your definition of accountability? And the second question I want to ask of you, and I like to do this if we could, Bruce, in a breakout session. I know there's very few of us on the call today. If you don't think that's necessary, Bruce, you're the expert at this more than me. Maybe a small group, we could do it without breaking out. You tell me. And then the second thing I want to ask is, if you had that ideal look of accountability in your relationships, what would that mean to you? What could be different? So how do you want to work this, Bruce? Anybody for any way? But Joe had a very interesting, I thought, approach to this accountability thing by his use of affirmations, which truthfully I hadn't heard before, to be honest with you. And then I asked him for an example of how he used those affirmations and around accountability. And what I heard was that he has conditioned himself, if you will, to not be attached to the outcome and to do the best that only he can do. And he's not attached to the outcome of others because you can't control other people. And the bottom line is that it sounds like he has less stress and drama in his life because he doesn't experience unfulfilled expectations because he doesn't have them. So first, Joe, did I get that right?
Exactly.
Would you like to share more with the group?
Well, I experienced that without even knowing. I took that approach when I had a scared me to death responsibility when I was in my mid-30s for a 18-month project, and I had all kinds of performance anxiety and blah blah blah. And I came up with, I'm going to make it as good as I can make it, and I don't give a shit what happens. And went into that mode, and it's kind of like a miracle happened. I couldn't believe the outcome. Nobody else could believe the outcome. And then because that project went so well, I got a 10 times bigger one that was even more scary. And I said, holy shit, I'm going to just do what I did, what I realized I'd done in that project. And the same thing happened. And I've been doing that ever since.
So when you mentioned that to me. It's a great story. You may recall a few moments ago, I told you my story and what it cost me by not being accountable, including losing my daughter for a period of time. So what I'm seeing is I saw miracles happen too. Look, I wasn't born this way. I learned all this stuff, and I'm not exactly perfect. And I found that when I was, I'll just use the word pushing myself onto people, if you will, okay, as opposed to pulling people toward me, and I use the word attracting people into me. When you change that, miracles happen. And, talking down and belittling people and not wanting into allowing yourself to have other smarter people in the room with you was a big shift for me. And when I got off of that and into the opposite, just like Joe says, miracles started happening in my life. No bull. So when you push yourself onto people, and we do that consciously and unconsciously, as opposed to shifting into changing our ways of being, if you will, you attract in people, opportunities, relationships, money, and the like. Thanks for sharing that. The other members that were in our breakout session, who would like to share anything at all before we talk about Bruce's group? Maya had some good stuff.
Before we leave this, I'd like to just say about 6 or 7 years ago, I was in a workshop and somebody recommended, I gave them something, they gave me something. And what they gave me was a book by Stephen Cope called The Great Work of Your Life. And basically what I learned when I read it was the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, about 2,000-year-old spiritual thing, was precisely what I stumbled onto when I was in my mid-30s and have been doing ever since. And I recommend that book to any. I think it's a brilliant book because it makes all of this understandable. And that's the thesis of the book. Make it as good as you can make it. Let the chips fall where they may. Turn it over to the universe and go for it. So now I'm complete.
Thanks for sharing. Let me just wind this down, and I'll turn it over to your group in a moment, Bruce. Here's just a few things that I heard, some of which we'll cover with our little tools, tips, techniques, and traps section, is that accountability is about doing what you say you're going to do and following through. It's about being careful what you do or what you say and not do it for a reward. It's about clarity of communication, and that it starts with yourself. As a result of some of these things, you have a loss of energy when you don't follow through on what you commit to yourself, and that you may not be taking it seriously. It just may be, let's just say, talk, if you will. And then Ron had a specific, hope I got that right, situation that I believe he had already spoken to Bruce about. And what I told him as a couple of maybe tools and tips were developing something in the beginning, to which I refer to as an upfront agreement, to have an understanding of the relationship at the beginning of the relationship, not at the end when the accountability does not exist, because Ron was explaining the situation where these two, he and another person, were butting heads because the accountability wasn't there. And also three other things were about drawing boundaries, and I expressed that they must be drawn respectfully and caringly, to which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment. Having clarity was another one, and then recapping your conversations to ensure that you're on the same page are some things that I've learned over the years that have helped me. What about the other group? Who would like to be our little spokesperson on what you guys talked about and share with the rest of us, please?
Alan, yeah, Bruce sent me a text and nominated me to be a little spokesperson. So I'm just going to take it and run here for a second and then quickly ask others for their opinion. But keywords I picked up were, one, the impact that MKP has had on all of us in our world of accountability and our consciousness of it and rules around it. And we spoke to owning choices. We spoke to, owning the consequences of choices or the outcomes, and being transparent with intentions. And spoke to, in some domains it's easy, some spaces it's easy, business, we got it. Personal life goes close to us, not as well. Maybe the stakes are higher, and that was tough. And the difference between agreements and expectations. So I'm going to leave, those were my thoughts or the things I captured, and I'll just leave it to Paul, Bruce, and Scott to elaborate on that.
Yeah, Ken, I think you got it very clear what our group talked about, but the other big part for me was communication on setting those expectations and making sure both parties are clear. That was really big for me.
So Ken, I agree from my personal experience that it is a little bit more challenging in personal relationships than it is in business, no doubt. And then you mentioned a moment ago, if I heard you correctly, there's a distinction between agreements and expectations. Did I get that right?
Yeah. And even on our weekends, the first question is always, well, what was the agreement? And if there's no agreement, it's mighty hard to have to be accountable. And expectations are either non-existent or just ever expanding. So we can beat ourselves up with expectations because they aren't clear. They just keep growing sometimes. And so, yeah, I love the saying that leading cause of frustration is expectations. Agreements, it actually becomes more clear to be accountable to an agreement than an expectation, because I can stack expectations up until I just, want to go to sleep.
Paul, Bruce, and if I miss somebody in the other group that you'd like to share?
I think
I'm
that
good.
I have a. You want to go ahead, Bruce?
Paul,
No, I'm good. You guys go ahead. I'm
Paul?
complete.
My focus is much more on what I do, not what other people do. And when I stand on the wall on a weekend, as a co-leader, I move quickly to inchoate agreements. There's no one involved. It's like, and I use the example of being a parent. When that baby is born, that 7-8 pound baby, you haven't reached any bilateral agreement with that child. You have made an inchoate agreement by being a parent. What were those agreements? What were those commitments? What were those promises? And I'll have 3 lifetimes of working my way personally through the agreements, promises, and commitments, explicit and inchoate and implicit, that I don't spend a lot of time on what you did. I really don't. And that's your work. That's my piece.
Great, thanks. Who else would like to share? Bruce?
No, that's fine. I'm good. I'm anxious to hear what's next.
Okay, Ken, you raising your hand?
I'm still triggered a bit on agreements and agreements and expectations, because when there's expectations, there seems to be a power differential. Some bigger person in me is making an expectation of me, or some bigger person is making, other person is in power is making the expectations. And agreements feel or can be more 50-50. They're mutual agreements, mutually agree. They're not, well, I expected you to do this, and either that's how I talk to myself or how I talk to others. And I know how I feel about it when others talk to me like that.
A coach I had one time said specificity sells, and to gain specificity, use examples. So I was wondering Is there an example that you could share with the group? You saw that coming, huh? With the group on the distinction between agreements and expectations.
Ouch, this morning. Wife and I are planning the day, and you know, we had many choices, you know, and I said, I really want to do this, but let's do something this afternoon. And the expectation we left with was, well, let's see how it develops. Well, I got a feeling it's not going to develop. There was no agreement to go to the movie, to go to dinner, to go to do or be with each other in any particular way. And given inertia, it feels like an expectation or an unagreed expectation, and we're not going to, you know, we're going to end up kind of going our own ways this afternoon unless we make a request, make a promise, make an agreement.
That's a great example. Happens every day in life, pretty much, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Or it could.
good.
You know, the classic is usually, you know, you invite someone to a party and they say, well, I'll try to be there. Okay, right? You hear that all the time. Well,
Yeah.
from my vantage point, my experience is, I don't think they're going to show up. You know, and what was it, Star Wars, right? There's no such thing as try, there's only do and no do, and that's about being clear with everything. Great. How about back to the PowerPoint and move on to the second W, which is what's in the way? Can we pop that back up on the screen there, Mr.
You bet.
Anderson, sir? Thank you. So let me just tell you a little bit about, how could I forget? Okay. So what my definition of accountability with care, AKA AWC, granted, this is started with accountability with care in the workplace, but it can work anywhere, is about keeping our word and with others, that is achieved with respect and care by having safe, open, honest, and transparent communication, and is without the fear of fault, blame, excuse, defensiveness, harassment, or bullying of any kind whatsoever. When we could approach people in this manner and be who we need to be to create this, to me, in my experiences in life, that's when the miracles start to happen. That's what I'm referring to as accountability with care. Can we go on? So the first one was, what's it look like, that we covered in the 3 W's game. The second one is, well, what's in the way, real or perceived? Because if we had what it looks like, we wouldn't need to talk about what's in the way, we'd already have it, but we need to throw out what's stopping, block, and slowing down in our way, et cetera, et cetera. And I was going to try something a little different. Instead of breaking out, I wanted to ask all of you to take from your head and put on a piece of paper, if you have something in front of you, or on your device, maybe 1 to 3 words, sentences, or phrases that what might be in your way of creating this ideal place of accountability. And the third bullet point, I always found this interesting, don't remember who taught me this, is don't let what's in the way get in your way of creating your ideal anything in your life, including your ideal relationship with others regarding accountability. Let me give you an example. I want to go on that vacation that I talked to you about before with this client that I told you about, to Hawaii, 2 weeks, etc. But as they're creating their ideal vacation, if they said, well, I want to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks, but we can't go because I don't have 2 weeks of vacation, that's allowing what's in the way to get in your way of even going. I say you need to sort of dream, if you will, and put out there ideally what you want, But so many people stop right here of getting what they want in their lives because they say, I can't do that. I don't have the experience. I don't have enough money to do this and do that. So go with me for a moment, even if it's just one thing. What's the number one thing, or two or three, that you feel gets in the way of having ideal relationships with others as it pertains to accountability? Could you take 2 quick minutes and just take it from your head and write it down? Then I'd like everybody to check in, and I'll give you my own take also. If you're done, just show me a finger, like I think it was, who was showing me their index finger? Was it Dave before? He pointed out that it was his index finger, not the other finger, okay? Which I thought was kind of cool. Good job, all right? This, while you're doing that, I just want to mention one thing. I would have a testimonial to whoever I learned this from, but I thought I learned early on that instead of just asking people a question like I am, well, what's one thing, that they taught me to say to your audience, if you will, to take it from your head and write it down or put it on a piece of paper. You're going to get way more engagement out of them than if you just ask it out of the blue. So hopefully I'll prove my point here and see what we get. All right, so who'd like to share first? What's one thing that gets in your way, real or perceived, that stops or limits your ideal relationship with regard to accountability? Who's first?
I'll go first. For me, I may make an agreement, but then my ego wants it done my way and not the way that we agreed on, because I think my way is better. So my ego gets in the way of living to that agreement.
So with the show of index fingers, how many people have ever expressed the same, experienced the same thing that Scott's talking about? Your ego can get in the way. I'll start with my index finger. Yeah, okay. That's a great one. Thank you. Do you have an example on that one?
Well, as I discussed with my group, a lot of my accountability issues is not with the commercial, but with my lovely wife of 36 years, almost 37 coming up. So I can't think of a specific example other than it happens all the time. And that's my work that I'm working on. So.
Thank you. Good one. Who's next? Yes, sir.
Well, another thing I think it gets in my way is maintaining openness, staying open, because I can watch my mind or my reasons for not doing something or my history gets in my way. And so I have to keep maintaining openness because fundamentally, a lot of times I really don't know.
Excellent. Good job. Thank you. Who's next?
Yeah, I can ride on Dave's coattails there, because I find myself imagining all kinds of problems that are going to jump up the minute I go forward. And I guess that's an ego thing. And in order to go forward, I have to put all that on the shelf and just throw it out the window and just do it and see what happens, because I haven't got a clue what's going to happen.
Okay, so you're imagining things, all kinds of problems going forward, and that gets in your way, or could get in your way.
Yes.
Good. By the way, just a sidebar note, in full transparency, most of the time I do this in the corporate world, not in personally like I'm doing with you guys, and your answers are, quite interesting, and I appreciate that. Who's next?
I'll go next. I think one of the things that gets in my way was a feeling if I commit to something that once it comes down to actually doing it, I've got to be in the right mood to do it. And, for instance, if I say, hey, I'll call you back about that tomorrow. Anyway, then tomorrow comes and I really, A, forget about it, or B, I really don't care to deal with it anymore. I'm not in the mood to carry on that conversation, or I've lost interest. So it comes down to, I guess, not being in the mood for it.
Well, in our breakout group, one of you said something to the effect that, only commit and follow through on what you really are going to follow through. Don't be making up this stuff and playing a game. So I can relate to that. Thank you, Carl. Who else?
Okay. So as I understand the question, what gets in my way from holding myself accountable and dealing with that when I'm out of integrity, when I break my word? And that was real easy for me. 3 words: shame, guilt, and sadness, in that order. And I find that the thing that blows up for me the most is in a personal relationship is shame. And what jumps up for me and maybe a business relationship, or just a what I call a common day commitment that I broke, is probably guilt. And that would be the top of it. Thank you.
Interesting. May I, Paul?
Sure.
Could you say a little bit more about what you mean, or some sort of an example, a little extension?
I gave an example in my group.
Oh, okay. Can you share
That
that with everyone?
Yeah, I'm going to do it right now. I wrote a
Thank
letter this week to my oldest child, 44 years old, to take ownership and of something I did between she and I 15 years ago. What got in my way for 15 years is the shame I carry about what I did. And it was powerful. It is powerful. So that's an example. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So who hasn't played yet?
I haven't played yet. Can I go ahead?
Sure.
Okay. What gets in my way between me and others is me not expressing how important that individual live up to that agreement. In other words, that I'm not just cavalier about it. I have to make a doctor's appointment, and please show up in time to pick me up, because it's very important that I make this appointment. So I think next time I deal with anybody in terms of having them picking me up, I'm going to express to them, for me to keep this appointment is very, very important. Please do not disappoint me.
Excellent. I can relate to that. How about you, Ken?
Yeah, I looked at my list of 3, and lo and behold, the first word in all of them was fear. So the one I'll pick on is fear that I'll disappoint. So that keeps me from making the promise, or maybe even asking or making the proposal. To pick on Carl's example of, I'll call you tomorrow afternoon. Sometimes we back away and we'll just say, well, I'll call you sometime when we know when that is. And so it's not a real clear agreement there. I'll call you sometime. And that specificity thing you talked about earlier. So I think that fear of disappointing others holds me back, and even probably even caretaking others. I don't make a strong request because I don't want them to feel all fearful. I don't want them to feel all obligated and stuff, So yeah, so it's fear. And by the way, my byline on fear is damn near all of fear is made up.
Mm.
Entirely fictitious. Yeah.
How about you there, Professor Bruce?
Well, one thing I've learned is that one phrase that works pretty well in terms of clarity, which really is what gets in my way, is a lack of clarity, is, can I count on you?
Mm,
That sort of nails down that they are committed to doing. And if you get a yes, then you get a double yes. You have a yes on the request and a yes on counting on. But what gets in my way, I think, is not having clarity around what I want, or not being clear around what the request is. That doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it reaps havoc at some level, the miscommunication.
Thanks for everyone sharing. Let me just give you a quick recap of what I heard. And Bruce, if it matters, whatever it is that you send out after these groups, I could send you my notes. But here's what I heard.
Mhm.
My ego gets in the way, maintaining openness, imagining all kinds of problems going forward, being in the right mood to do it or losing interest, shame, guilt, and sadness, not expressing how important it is to the other person, fear of disappointing others, and can I count on you, and not being clear on the request. Thanks, good job. Let's go to the last W. The last W of the 3 W's game is, this is where you got to get into action. What's it going to take? If you could put the PowerPoint back up, please. So what's it going to take? So we've laid, just a recap so far, we've laid out what accountability means to yourself, the definition, and what would it be like if you had that. We laid out very clearly and very succinctly, and thank you for playing, all the things that may be in our way, real or perceived. Well, now how do we get this accountability? What is it that we need to do? I'll just use the phrase more of, less of, or different, to take away these things that are in the way to give us what we want ideally. I thought that the way in which we conducted it without the breakout sessions, I found kind of interesting, because we're a small group, and I like to just propose that we do that one more time. So here's my question to you. This is the part, by the way, where now we got to make the commitment as to what we're going to do to get better relationships with other people or ourselves with regard to accountability, and what's the action that we're going to take. So here's the question for everybody. And again, if you could take it, you did great. If you take it from your heads and put it on a piece of paper on your electrical device, what is it that you need to do more of, less of, or different? What commitment are you going to make? What action do you need to take to create ideal accountability in your life? Take 2 quiet minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. And ask your question, can I count on you? I just find that very strengthening. So I'm going to do, like he said, 2 different things. One is to get that individual to say, yeah, okay, I'll pick you up to take your appointment. And the next second question is, can I count on you? I just think that's a real closer. And if the individual says yes, then obviously, if he doesn't show up, he really lacks accountability to stand behind his commitment. So I'm going to take Bruce's idea and run with it. Well done, Bruce.
Thank you. Well done, Ron. Who's next?
I'll go. For me, what's really resonated with me, and this came from our subgroup, was communication, making sure that the agreement is clear on both parties. And then, maybe by paraphrasing the agreements, making sure that I'm clear and the other party's clear. And then the next part of that is just awareness, keeping that top of mind of what my commitment was, what my agreement was. And again, just keep it top of mind and focused when I'm going through the process. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Who would like to go next?
I'll go. I'm married to a woman who does not like surprises. Matter of fact, when I asked her to marry me, I gave her a 2-month notice that she was going to be proposed to, so that she had time to think about it. So we have a situation here where there needs to be some changes in the household and the way the furniture is arranged, and one of the rooms have to be turned upside down and changed in order to accommodate my office downstairs rather than upstairs. And I've been working on keeping her informed about what needs to take place over the last several weeks. And I'm realizing that I need to do more, okay? Again, to create clarity and to be more communicative. I don't do anything surreptitiously, and I found myself sort of doing that. As an example, I made arrangements yesterday to extend the Wi-Fi and get additional Wi-Fi capability. And I hadn't mentioned it to her. So I'm in process, but I'm not fully communicating. So that's what I do need to do more, is to be more forthright about what I would like to happen and making requests that I get buy-in.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I'll go next. The word that came to my mind on the kind of the question was as to, how do I move forward on my commitment to accountability? So first of all, the general concept was that I really need to recommit to accountability, that, hey, it is something important. Secondly, a lot of times I'll say that I'm going to do something that I'm really not fully committed to doing. So the word that came to my mind for me to ask myself is, when I'm getting ready to make a commitment, is in my mind to say, really? Really? Am I going to call you tomorrow? Okay. Really? Am I going to send you that book? Really? Are you going to pick me up for this appointment? Now, there are different levels I found out of how easily I can do that. Like if I had committed to Ron that I was going to pick him up for a doctor's appointment, that would be a major commitment. Whereas if I say, hey, Ron, I'll call you and check in tomorrow, that would not be a major commitment. So if I ask myself that question, hey, am I going to pick Ron up tomorrow for his appointment? And the answer to really would be yes, really, I'm going to.
Nice.
And the other one, no. So anyway, so I've had a little fun reminder to myself is to ask that question. And then there's one that I like. It's also the same really, but it's a totally incredulous really. Really?
Simple
Am I
and
really
effective.
going to do that?
I like
Anyway,
it. Thank you. All right, who hasn't played? Yes, Mr.
yeah.
Index Finger. Oh, 2 index fingers. I saw Dave first and Joe.
Okay, so one of my challenges is dealing with breakdowns. I've had a lot of breakdowns. It's sort of interpersonal and in getting a plumber to come and getting insurance people to help me, a number of things. And and what I have, because I get reactivated, so what I have to do is hit the pause button and say, okay, wait a second, what's my intention? What's the commitment in the background here? Because it's a bunch of breakdowns, and it's like I need this thing fixed, or I need this plumber to come. And so I have to get back in touch with the original intention, which is to get these people to do what I need them to do. Not take it personally, not get righteous about it, just get back on track. So it's like declare see the breakdown, declare it, and get back on track. So that's what I came up with.
Nice job, Joe.
What I came up with is it relates to clarity of communication and my kind of propensity to imagine that I know where the other person's at and what's important to them. And so what I'll do more of is I think something they call deep listening, or just me being clear that we're both on the same page, because I move forward in a lot of difficulties with other people when I think I know where they're at and they're not, and I didn't spend enough time to get clear on being on the same page. So more deep listening and more verification and more time where we have both, I'm clear and they're clear.
Thank you. And Scott? Oh, no, Scott,
I already
sorry.
spoke.
I'm sorry, I thought I saw your hand. Who hasn't played? Maybe Paul can? Maybe?
Yeah, what I wrote down is, first of all, do I want to look at the accountability? I mean, to me, accountability always starts with after the fact. I made a promise, blah, 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 promise, commitment, whatever you want to call it. I did not keep it. So number one, I need to be mindful that I didn't even do it. You know, sometimes I'll just blow through it. If I get through that, what I wrote here was my stretch will be, okay, I made a promise. I broke that promise or agreement. I will take 5 minutes to journal and I'll respond to the question, what happened? What happened? So thank you. That'll be a great lift if I can do that. Thank you.
Interesting. Nice. How about you, Ken? I don't think you played yet.
Yeah, I kind of did a sequence of 5 things, but the one I think is unique is I'm going to name my fears when considering a commitment. So, it's easy, if the commitment is to, brush my teeth, there's not a lot of fear about that, but occasionally I forget, but those fears about, the tougher conversations and things like that. And what I'm kind of liking about this is that the practice is I'm going to try this out on the daily to-do list. So as I'm considering, so the practice is to get this into the daily thing, to get these fears out in front so that I can name them, when I'm doing the to-do list. So if one of those to-dos is, call Tom about new business opportunity. Well, there's 100 fears behind that, but that could be really the big payout phone call. So why not just name those fears? And that, to me, that would, that's kind of accountability with care, in the sense that just to acknowledge them and name them. And then, and to me, it also puts them in the playing field and makes it a lot easier to follow through and actually be accountable.
Thank you. All good stuff. Again, let me recap what I heard. And forgive me if I didn't hear it exactly. Here's what I heard. Ask yourself, can I count on you? And try to get to 2 yeses. That the making sure that the agreement is clear from both parties, paraphrasing it and keeping it top of mind. I heard being more communicative in making the requests and getting buy-in. I heard recommit to accountability and ask, really? Okay. Hit the pause button. more deep listening, verification, and time spent so that both parties are clear. To be mindful, take 5 minutes to journal and ask what happened. And finally, to name my fears when making commitments and to add this to my daily to-do list. Can we go back to the PowerPoint, Bruce? And I'll share maybe a tool, a tip, a technique, or a somewhere that we want to avoid being. So let me just go over that with you, and then we could wrap it up. Now, you guys are all smart guys, and you've already nailed many of these things that I had, but maybe I could add something more or less or different with you. Could we go to the next slide? So tools, tips, techniques, and traps. So the first thing is, I think it begins having accountability, and this is what I lead with even in corporations, is who do you need to be in order to have this accountability take place? Starts with who, not necessarily what. And I developed this little thing called the ACC, a model of accountability. And it goes like this, that we practice approaching people versus what normally happens, we attack them, that we demonstrate care versus control, and that we seek clarity as opposed to the opposite, which we won't have when we're not clear. It leads to confusion. Now, my intention, time permitting, was maybe to touch a little bit on each one of these, but I think we're winding down with the time. But I just wanted to give you that if you stay on that left side of that little three items that I had, the model of accountability versus the right side, you're going to set yourself up more in life to have accountability. Bruce, what I can commit to is afterwards sending out a little bit of something a little more of a write-up on this ACC model of accountability for those that might be interested. Can we go to the
We
next
can do
slide?
that. Now be aware, Alan, that we have about 20 more minutes.
Oh, okay. I thought you needed time at the end to do whatever.
Yeah,
you do.
about 10 minutes. So it's just a little after the hour. So
All
we
right,
have,
well, all right,
yeah.
so I'll elaborate briefly on each one. So what I mean by the distinction of approaching an attack, let me start with the attack first. It's like you get up on the wrong side of the bed and you're hitting people with this, and you said, and you did this, and you're pointing fingers, la, la, la. I mean, I got a whole thing written up on, but briefly, that's what I mean by attack. You could feel that versus the opposite of what I feel is approaching people with care, with respect. And the manner in which you approach these people and talk, again, is going to attract these people to you like a magnet. It's so unbelievably different. Okay, that's a very brief thing. Second one is demonstrating genuine concern versus being controlling with people. People don't like controlling people. There's a time for controlling, like, on the battlefield, maybe lunch time in a restaurant, we might want to have control and the like, but overall, people don't like to be controlled. They don't want to be told what to do and how to do it. Then you're in your face. But when you demonstrate genuine concern for other people, and I emphasize the word genuine, again, you're going to see how that accountability will take place. People, this, sense, feel, and recognize when you're not being authentic and really caring in an authentic manner, as what's the I'm lost for the Tom Hanks played that guy in the movie when he said, or it comes from your buttocks, if you remember. What was his name? Help me out.
Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump. Okay. So they recognize when it's not coming from your heart or even your head, and they know immediately when it's coming from your buttocks. So that demonstrating true and authentic care is huge. And finally, and we've touched on this tremendously today, is having clarity around what the heck it is that we're talking about, what we want, as opposed to what's going to happen if you're not clear and you're just going to be in confusion, and no one wants that. And I will send something out on you. I always found this to be a very, very interesting approach to people. It's very simple to understand, and hopefully you took away something. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So what are some things that I found that help? Man, maybe none of these are earth-shattering, but we'll go through them. Is that first and foremost, you have to be a really, really good listener in order to have accountability. And the other thing that I found is you're going to get more honey by staying more on what I call the ask side than the tell side. By telling people, it just, it kind of limits your possibilities, if you will. But if you ask people and you engage them, I see that other opportunities can exist. And I also emphasize the use of open-ended questions versus closed-ended questions, because when you engage somebody in a conversation that is in some way, shape, or form related to accountability, and you use closed-ended questions, that's only going to lead you to a yes or no answer, and is not really going to explain what it is that we want to have happen. Some things that I use on a regular basis that works for me, because it's quick, it's down and dirty, and it works, and it surfaces the gap that's necessary in your conversation with the person. And I use it all the time, is on a scale of 1 to 10, how well am I doing today, Mr. or Mrs. Jones, on being accountable to you? Oh, 7. Okay, great. So tell me, what is it that we need more or less of or different to move the needle from a 7 to an 8 to a 9 or a 10? And I use that all the time, and it just helps me identify very quickly to get down to what we really want to discuss. And it helps with the accountability. Of all the things that I've utilized or have in the system that I created in the book, recapping seems to be one of the most powerful tools that I use. It just is not, it's underused in my opinion. So what I mean by recapping is, and by the way, I'm going to tie in recapping to being a great listener. I'm going to tie the two of them together. So recapping, sounds something like, so Paul, what I heard was A, B, C, and D. Is that correct, Paul? And Paul says, well, Alan, you got A and B right, and D, but we got to talk a little bit about C for a moment. So the idea is that the two of you leave the conversation on the same page. Are we talking about the same thing? I mean, are you leaving with apples, or are we leaving with pears? And by recapping that, that goes an awful long way. Now, don't get carried away with being on the ass side, or don't get carried away with being, in the recapping. For example, if you go to someone and you say, can you tell me where the men's room is? And the other person says, well, where do you think it is? You think it's on the left side of the building or the right side of the building? Be careful, don't get carried away with all of this. And I found that if you want to be a great listener and have other people discover that you are paying full attention to them, is to go into almost every conversation thinking that you have to recap the conversation with them. If you know that you have to recap the conversation with them, you're going to pay very close attention to them, because you're going to have to repeat back what it is that they said. And I found that when people start utilizing this recapping, it it translates to the other person to saying, oh my God, Alan, he's really paying attention to me. Holy shit, what happened to him? You know, what did he do? Put his finger, you know, his index finger in a light socket? Wow, what's going on here? Okay, that's how strong I think these things can be for you. Simple, yeah. Effective, yeah. Easy to do, not necessarily, okay? But it's like anything, you got to build a muscle for it. ATE is an acronym for 3 words, and this is one of these traps that I want to kind of put the caution flag out to you. It happens over and over and over again in my experiences, both in the workplace and not. And the acronym is allow, tolerate, and enable. Interestingly, you could take those 3 words and make it ATE, TEAT, or what's the other one here? Or EAT, eat, okay? T, 8, and eat. Allow, tolerate, enable. So what do I mean by that? Well, we've had a history of allowing other people to, in this instance, not be accountable. We've tolerated less than acceptable behaviors from people, in this particular case, on being accountable to us or us accountable to others. And we enable other people by allowing and tolerating, by kind of letting them slide, or sometimes doing it for them. None of these 3 work. And there's a way, I think, to maybe address this. And if we can continue with the next slide, I think it's there. And it's an exercise that we refer to as drawing boundaries. Now, nothing new and earth-shattering to you, but this is where I found, you know, a huge breakthrough in my life and in my personal relationships. The technical definition, I guess you could say, is a boundary is a standard behavior that you have for others with whom you are in relationship. When your boundaries are violated, you have a choice. You can accept it, or you could set a boundary or leave the relationship. In fact, you've probably heard in any endeavor in life, you have 3 choices: leave it, change it, accept it as is. You can leave it by saying, you know, not the index finger, but the other finger to people and say, F you, I'm out of here. I don't want to associate with you. I can't stand you anymore. We're done. We're out. You have that choice always. Accept it means accept it always as only as is, without any kind of reservation, kind of like unconditionally, like unconditional love, and without fault, blame, excuse, and bitch, moan, and whine. Or you can leave it, change it. You can, you can change it, but you only can change what you have the power to change. You can't change other people. So when I asked you earlier, what's the one thing, the one action step that you could take responsibility of around setting boundaries with people, you had a great list of things. You have control over that. But like I believe it was Joe said, he's not attached to the outcome. You can only do your best on doing these things. You have no control, in my experiences, of the outcome. You do have control on what you can do. And finally, around setting boundaries is that they have to be done respectfully, professionally, and caringly, if you will. One little phrase that I use that seems to be effective is back to that ATE. We've allowed, we've tolerated, we've enabled. Now we need to change things. Time out. We need to draw a boundary with people. And it sounds like this. I'm sorry, Ken, but you know, that's no longer acceptable. And that, I swear to you, that little phrase goes a long way. First and foremost, they're not expecting it. It's not, you know, rude or anything. It's just, I apologize in the beginning. It's like, let me just say that again, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, we can't go forward like this anymore. That's just not acceptable. Can we have a conversation around that? And somebody used the word miracles before. It has been miracle-like in my experiences in my life. You just might want to try it out. So that's about drawing boundaries. Moving on, Bruce, we'll wind down. I got one more little slide, I think. So here's one that I hear all the time. People tell me that this next bullet point that I'm calling "they're not you" may be the most challenging to understand and to execute. So this sounds like this, what do you mean you forgot to pick me up for the doctor? That's not so hard. I mean, anybody can remember that. What's the matter with you? Okay. Well, hold on a minute. Okay. You may be right, but they're not you. And we have to have, I think, just more understanding and patience of other people. And we do that by, integrating some of these steps that I talk about asking open-ended questions, staying on the ask side, better listening. But at the end of the day, they're not you. Let me give you an example. Now, this happens to be in a corporate world, and it's the first thing I thought of, but it can happen anywhere. I was working with a client, and he kept coming on to me about saying, well, Johnny just doesn't follow through with that on my team, and Betty, she doesn't do this. And I mean, it's so, hey, how about this? Bruce and I this morning, Bruce, right? Come on now. Okay.
Mhm.
I am not Bruce, and Bruce is not me. Here's a classic example. At the top of the show, Bruce told me how patient I was. Bruce was just being nice to me. I was totally impatient because I don't have the skill set that he has when it comes to computers and laying out PowerPoints, etc. He's not me and I'm not you, but he did a great job of being patient with me because he knows that I'm not him, and vice versa. I get this all the time. I'm on a hike with my friend Mark recently. He says, oh, Alan, that thing on the computer, it's so freaking easy. Anybody can do it. I went, oh, really, Mark? I go, okay. So I say, hey, Mark, how's your golf swing? He goes, well, what do you mean? I said, why don't you show me your golf swing? Take that stick over there in the woods and just show me your golf swing. Mark doesn't know the first thing about golf, probably never played golf, wouldn't understand what a good swing is. So just before he picks up the stick, he says to me, I got it, Alan. Now I understand. It's not so easy for you, is it? I go, no, Mark, it's not. They're not you. Okay. True story. Happens all the time. Bet you all can relate to that. Right? Hard to do. And then finally, I'll close with a little story here if I have a moment. I'm not proud to tell you that when my own father died, I have 3 other siblings. I didn't even sit next to them at the funeral, okay? Because I had a falling out with my siblings. And I had a falling out with my siblings when I was going through a divorce that I also mentioned earlier. And my perception was that I was right, that they sort of, ganged up on me and sided with my former wife on some things. And I thought that, they should be supporting me as the brother, but they sided with my wife. And that just totally tuned me out and pissed me off. So I went on I'm not talking to you for, I don't know how long it was. And it persisted and even carried over when my father died, that I was still pissed off at him, and I didn't even sit with them at the funeral. Again, I'm not proud to tell you that, but that's how bad it was. One day, a good friend of mine, who's also now a coach, said something to me that, I don't know, I just never heard of. And this is before I was in the coaching business, maybe that's why I didn't understand it. And I'm sitting in a chair one day and he says, so Alan, regarding this relationship that you have with your siblings right now, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I said to him, what are you talking about? I am right. They sided with my wife. No, Alan. Let me ask you again. Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And he still didn't have a clue as to what the hell he's talking about because I was so far into being right. Then he said to me, So Alan, do you want to hang on being right? Or do you want to have a happy and loving relationship with your siblings? I said, oh, I said, well, I like to have a happy and loving relationships with my siblings. He said, then you have to get off of being right. I said, but I am right. I said, you may be, but you got to get off of that. Then he said to me, talk about action right in a moment. Which one of your 3 siblings do you think you could reach out to that would be most receptive to getting back to having a relationship with? I said, what do you mean? He goes, I want you to call him right now. Right now, you want me to call him? Yeah. I said, well, I think it's my younger sister, Stephanie. So call her up. I call her up and I invited her over for lunch. She accepted. At that time, she had like a 5 or 7-year-old son. He came too, with her to lunch at my apartment. She knocked on the door, I opened the door. I don't know, 17 seconds, transpired. And the next thing you know, we're in each other's arms, bawling our brains out. The moral of the story and what happened after that was I asked her to reach out to the next sibling that she thought might be most receptive, to which led me to the 3rd sibling. Now we're all connected. That's 20 more years ago. We have regular scheduled siblings calls. There's no drama going on. There's nothing going on. We all get along great. So my message to all of you is think about this, whatever it may be in your life. Do you want to go around being right, or do you want to be happy about A, B, C, X, Y, Z? It was a huge, huge thing for me and could definitely help you with your accountability in your life. Thoughts, comments, questions, anything